Today, we're diving into a critical topic for parents, coaches, and athletes: bullying, toxic environments, and how they impact the developing brain. This conversation is inspired by the work of Jennifer Frazier, including her books, The Bullied Brain and The Gaslit Brain. In The Bullied Brain, Frazier explains that bullying isn't just about emotion. It can actually create lasting changes in the brain, especially in children. In The Gaslit Brain, she goes further, showing how toxic systems often protect the bully, silence the victim, and normalize harmful behavior. This is incredibly relevant in youth sports because what often gets labeled as tough coaching or competitive culture or just a part of the game can sometimes cross the line into psychological harm that impacts performance, confidence, and long-term development. Today, we're exploring how bullying affects the brain, why it's often ignored in sports, why neurodivergent athletes are more vulnerable, and how we can build environments that actually help kids thrive. So with that, welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks so much for having me, Derek. These are topics I love to talk about.
Yeah, I'm so excited you're here. So if we could start off, as I said, I know a little bit of the background and how the books came to be in your story. But if you could you go into a little bit about your background and how it did all come to be for the folks that maybe don't know or haven't heard you or come across your work before?
Yeah, so my PhD is in comparative literature. Most people don't know what that is, so I'm just going to give you a 30-second version of what we were trained to do. And what they taught us to do was to take different discourses out of their silos, put them into the arena, see how the conversation changed. So it was very natural to me that the last two books is my fourth and fifth book. I've been writing and researching all of my professional life. But what I did, which was unusual, was I took bullying and abuse cultures and abuse in sport, and I put it into the arena with brain science. It's kind of an odd combo. It's not what we are taught to do in our lives. Most of us we grow up ignoring our brains because our society doesn't know anything about them and certainly doesn't seem to want us to know anything about them. So it's only been in recent years that brain science is kind of part of the popular consciousness. So I put bullying and abuse and brain science into the arena, and I was honestly shocked. I was so shocked by what I was reading because the research is very clear. And this isn't cutting edge. It's not new. This is research that's been around for 20 or 30 years. The experts in brain science know that bullying in all its forms, where it does not touch the body, all the kinds of the put downs, the ignoring, the refusing feedback, the not meeting your eyes, the yelling in your face, all these things that don't touch the body, they can still do physical damage to brain architecture. Physical damage. It's visible on brain scans. So this is the kind, I just want every coach to know this. I want every parent to know this. And I want every athlete to know this. Because once you know that your brain actually is very vulnerable to other people's unresolved issues and psychological traumas, and they don't know how to operate, or they've just simply been indoctrinated, as you described at the beginning, Derek. You're like, some coaches have been trained in the tough coaching model, the competitive coaching model, and they think they're enhancing their athlete's performance. They believe it because our brains get wired to believe. And then we operate that way. But the truth of it is the research flies in the face of that. The research shows very clearly that type of coaching, that type of leadership in the workplace, that type of parenting, what it really does is limit brains. It harms them. It causes them to be dysfunctional. It causes them to repeat similar behaviors that are starting to be less and less acceptable in society. And I mean, it sets them on a really negative path. So this is why it's great to talk about it, share the science, and get a dialogue going on how do we make change.
Absolutely. And I had read as well. One of the main ways in which this all came to be was that you identified and were part of essentially a whistleblower for a key event that had happened in your past as an educator, where you saw that there was a faculty member bullying a team, correct?
Yeah. So I was working in a university prep school, an international boarding school with kids from all over the world. It's just a really fabulous school on many levels. And so I've been working there, teaching there. I've been teaching there for 8 years. I'm great friends with everybody. I admire the administration, etc. And the kids are fabulous. So I started getting reports from parents, and the parents were saying to me that there were actually 4 teachers who were coaching. They were all coaching basketball, and that they were really abusive. And so, of course, I had to go straight to the administration. I went straight to the board with this information. I had to report. So I reported this was happening. The headmaster of the school, first of all, a board member asked me to collect data from parents. So I had upwards of 30 parents telling the same stories, parents stretching over 5 years. These individuals, these teachers, were incredibly abusive. And so once I gathered that data, I sent it to the headmaster and the board and the people that required me to do it. The headmaster then said, "Oh, I want you to interview students. I need to hear from them directly. If I'm going to do anything, to take action, I have to hear from the victims." I was like, okay. So I took 8 testimonies, 4 girls, 4 boys. You sit across from, it's all organized by how it's court protocol, basically. It's like taking a legal testimony.
Mm-hmm.
So you sit across from them for 2 hours or however long it takes. Most of them talk for 2 hours. And you just say, "Could you tell me about your experience?" You're not supposed to react or show facial expressions, or the only thing you say is, "I'm really sorry this happened to you." And you ask only clarifying questions like, "What were the words that were used?" Or "How did it make you feel?" As the kid narrates basically what's happened. So I was doing that, and the boys kept talking about how there were these scenes of public humiliation. The teacher would stop the practice, point to the spot in front of him in the floor, and this same kid had to come up every time, and the coach would start yelling in his face. And it was all rhetorical questions. It wasn't like asking, "Why did you make that decision?" It was things like, "You're the best player out there. Do you even like basketball? You don't even
Mm-hmm.
deserve to be here. Why are you even here?" Like yelling in his face. The other teacher would stand and watch, which is a really important function that we should talk about. It's the normalization of this type of conduct. So the kid would hit a certain point where he couldn't take it. It's like 16 years old. You start to back away, just physically try to preserve himself from this. And going like, well, another key point about this is the student was on an individual education plan because he's an auditory processor. So he processes information through hearing. So yelling was particularly like disorienting and disturbing to his brain. So he's getting yelled at in the face. The kids are saying this happened hundreds of times. One of them described it as vicious. One said we wanted to stop it, but we couldn't because it was our teacher. So I'm listening to this, and finally, I asked my clarifying question. I said, "And who was it? Who did this happen to?" And the boy says, "Monty. Monty is my son." So that, honestly, talk about crossing a line in the sand. I immediately transformed in that moment from from teacher doing my duty, fulfilling my legal duty to report abuse, and I became a mother. And
Mm-hmm.
that was just unfortunate for that school and those teachers and the administration.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I would be, um, and how old at the time was your son, or
16
these students? So these were high school. This is the high school level.
high school students. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I'd be curious in that situation too. With this coach, I've spoken to a couple of people, through our own experience, and now there's some other guests that I've talked to on the podcast. We talk a lot about the environment, right? The environment that's created around these kids to help them succeed, whether they're neurodivergent or they're not, or they're athletes or they're not. But in this scenario, I would be so curious, what was the process like to ensure that the coach who is doing the bullying, or coaching aggressively, coaching sarcastically, passive aggressively, whatever we want to call it, but obviously being very abrasive, um what was his understanding of your sons or any of the players on his teams, um you know like behavioral situation, or the IEP that you may mention to, like, how familiar was he with that? Because again, I look at it like this is a collective effort, right? And if one of the faculty members that is one of the probably one of the main go-tos for an athlete at that level, right? Like a very inspirational person in their life, isn't understanding that IEP or the situation that is going on with this student, like there's something there that's not connected. So how, like, where was that divide, and why was he not following the line with what you guys have had all built for your son and the other athletes?
Well, what's interesting about individuals like this is I sat in meetings with them. These are my
Yep.
colleagues. I sat in meetings where the individual education plan for my son was discussed. I saw it. I was there. They were the most informed. They're teachers. They're certified teachers. And so, unfortunately for individuals like this, they are not interested in seeing athletes succeed. They don't want the team to win. If the team wins, it limits their ability to lambaste them and humiliate them and degrade them. They can't do that when the team wins. So, these were especially one of them was a very, very talented coach,
Mm-hmm.
technically really, really knowledgeable. But then this is typical of people who suffer from psychopathology. When you have psychopathology, you're a narcissist, a Machiavellian, literally a psychopath, and it's visible on a brain scan. When you suffer from these types of mental conditions, you are usually highly intelligent. You are able to create a cult following. You know how to push people's buttons. And one of the things that you will do is laser in on any kind of insecurity or vulnerability a person has in order to destroy them, basically. And our son, I mean, the coaches themselves said, he's one of the most talented players to come through that school in 100 years. He's slated. He was going to be highly sought after on college teams. He's 6'4". The kid towers over these guys. He's an absolutely brilliant athlete.
Yep.
Anyone who ever saw him play, whether it was basketball, hockey, rugby, squash, I mean, anything, he's just got that gift. And basketball was his passion. Like he couldn't get enough of it. If he wasn't in the gym competing, he would be going to a basketball camp on, spring break and Christmas break. That's all he wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they just systemically destroyed him. And they did other athletes as well. I mean, to give you another example of, well, what did they think about someone's diversity or vulnerability? Well, they used it against them. Because that was a way, a leverage for them to hurt. So one of the kids was a First Nations, an Indigenous player, first kid in his family to go to graduate high school, like just this fabulous athlete. You've never seen anything like it. And he came to the school in grade 10 on a full scholarship. And so he was in boarding, he's so on and so forth. And they had emails saying things to the team like, oh, we're going to go out scalp hunting tonight and stuff like that. And they called him, and I won't say the full language for
Yeah.
your podcast, but they called
Mm-hmm.
him,
Mm-hmm.
effing lazy. And they
Mm-hmm.
called the boys effing pathetic and effing pussies and effing retards. You want to
Wow.
talk about sensitivity on an IEP? How do you like effing retards? These guys were mentally unhinged. I'm telling you, but you'd never know it if
Yeah.
you met them. They were charming, intelligent, hardworking. It's just that behind the closed doors of practices is where you see. It's just like with a pedophile. That's where the abuse is happening, and they can hide it. They're very good at manipulating, hiding, and doing their destruction.
Yeah, yeah, and going off that, with them having the ability to hide what they're doing, you know, obviously when we're talking about text messages and things like that that are obvious identifiers of, hey, there's something going on, like, but when there's not those things. So if you're a parent of an athlete that is on a sports team where, you're unsure if something's going on, what are some maybe not so obvious cues that a parent could look for from their child to, maybe get an idea of how things are going?
I think the most important thing to do, and this is something that my husband and I failed to do, I don't know how we missed it, but we did not train our son in the proper language to report abuse. So I
Mm-hmm.
recommend all parents, it's uncomfortable. It's like sex education or talking to kids about drugs and alcohol. It's things that we feel uncomfortable about. But the more you're proactive about it and get them to understand the right words to use, as well as the right behaviors to recognize, you are setting them up for a whole lot more safety. So our son as a teenager said to us, the first thing he said was, I am the subject of relentless criticism. And we said, well, you're lucky. They're paying really good attention to you because they've already said they know you're going to play college. They're trying to take you to the next level, and that you're lucky you have their attention. We didn't know enough to recognize what he was really trying to say. And then he said, like he should have said, I am publicly humiliated in front of the other boys over and over and over again. Really? What do you mean? What is said? And then get the words. But we didn't. He also said, I hate those guys. Now that's a really, my son doesn't say I hate another kid, let alone say that. But you know what happened to me, which I'm sort of ashamed to share, but really what happened was it was very hard for me to wrap my mind around the fact that my colleagues were hurting my child.
Sure.
My job was on the line. It was my livelihood. It was my community. It's a place I love to work. I was very successful there. And for me to have to really hear the truth of what my son was telling me meant I was going to have to quit. I'd have to resign. I'd have to find another job. And at that point, I didn't know they were going to cover up. It's pretty amazing to watch what leadership will do in these kinds of really serious situations.
I mean, especially at the highest levels of athletics, right? All these crazy stories you hear of coaches, but they're just coaching hard, or they're their old school mentality, right? But you can read their lips of what they're saying to their players when they're showing it on TV, and you just think to yourself, how does that kid take that? Like how like, I mean, I'll just give you an example. Like, I'm a Villanova guy, right? So one of our biggest rivals is UConn. Okay. I watched their head coach Hurley for their college basketball team, and what he screams at his players when they show on, CBS when they're cutting out the commercial during March Madness, and you can just read his lips. It's incredible. It is absolutely incredible that, I mean, the people that work at that university that can also read his lips, let that go on. Now, but again, he's a national champion. Right? He's a national champion. So like what they talk about, like, that's just one example. There's things that are far worse than what I just used as an example that have happened. But, at the same time, like, to me, there's a bullying aspect there. Like, you are berating that 18 to 22-year-old child, not child, but you know what I mean? Like young adult, in front of millions of people. And it can't resonate well with the parents of that athlete or the athlete themselves. But again, these coaches get away with it because of their success,
Yeah. That whole dynamic that you've just described is so perfect to talk about gaslighting. So just to remind your audience, gaslighting, it's a word that gets thrown around a lot these days, but here's the actual 21st century definition. Gaslighting is when you grossly mislead someone, especially for your own advantage. So you have to ask yourself, is that coach, is he misleading those athletes in his behavior and how he talks to them and treats them? And does he get an advantage from it? Well, he does, because his advantage is he's able to act like a full-on psychopath in front of hundreds of people and get applauded for it. He gets the dopamine hit that he wants from abusing people. And lots of people do things like that, and they get the accolades. Now, if you look at the research, you know for a fact he's not winning because he does that. He's winning because he teaches at an elite school where athletes come to a very elite program. He gets the best athletes. Those athletes, none of us even know what that school could do if he wasn't abusing them. Imagine if they had a healthy coach, what they would be doing. Would they be, he doesn't win the championship because of abuse. He wins it despite the abuse because his athletes are so good. And they come from families that care about the sport, that fueled and paid for the sport, that had the nutrition for their kids, that had the academics for their kids. He's got a rarefied group of athletes. So of course he's doing well. But it's amazing. The gaslighting piece is it makes you believe things that are not true against your own senses. So you're clear-headed enough to say, I can see him abusing those athletes. I see it. And nothing that you say about it is going to change what I see. So
Yeah.
when I went and reported to the headmaster and I said, okay, this is the abuse that's happening, this is what's being reported, he looked at me and he smiled and he said, that's just old school coaching.
Yep.
And I in that moment, I didn't know. I had never heard the word gaslighting. This is in
Yeah.
2012. I'd never heard about gaslighting. I didn't know what it was, but he didn't change my perception because luckily for me, I'm a trained academic. So I was like, okay, well, he's telling me what his reality is, which actually has a lot of weight because he's my boss. He pays my livelihood. He controls my job, my reputation, my career, my access to the community. And he's telling me that what I'm seeing as abuse is incorrect. There's something wrong with me. I should really look inwards and fix what's wrong with myself. It's just that when he said that to me, I went, And I
Mm-hmm.
went straight to the research. I read
Yeah.
doctors, psychologists, neuroscientists, and psychiatrists. And every single one of them said that that type of abuse damages brains.
Yep. And it's fascinating too, because you alluded to it a couple of minutes ago. They also have their team members, the players that play for them, kind of wired in a way where they are they are not going to voice their concern, right? Unless it's physical, I feel like, because we see a lot more of that in, over time, right? We can use the Bobby Knight examples and various things that we've seen throughout the last 10, 20 years of, like, when there's a physical altercation or it's caught on camera or something, it's blatant, it's obvious, and then it's the headline on ESPN. But when it's that everyday mental beatdown, right? The verbal beatdown that just kind of builds and builds and builds mentally. That's the stuff we don't hear it enough about. That really affect the athlete. And then obviously that leads to so many other things, like, obviously, depression, anxiety, burnout, far worse than that potentially as well. So, that's where it really comes in, is the verbal aspect that gets really bad, really bad.
So, one of the best cases for this to really take a look at that helps people stay clear. So when you start hearing, he wins championships and this is why he does it and he's a tough coach, and then you say to yourself, well, how come in pro sports we don't see this kind of athlete maltreatment? Pro sports is big money. It's really, really big money. And remember when Mike Rice got identified on ESPN and his
Mm-hmm.
assistant coach who played for the NBA? Now, the NBA professional looks at Mike Rice and goes, yeah, no, you don't treat athletes that way. It's not going to win anything. So he reported on Mike Rice and noticed that the administration knew, but they didn't effectively stop him. They just, give him a slap on
Mm-hmm.
the wrist. You can't play for 3 games. You're going to have to pay some chunk of money, whatever. And they left him abusing those athletes. And until it
Mm-hmm.
was seen, and what was really interesting is to watch professional athletes respond to the video. So if you so LeBron James wrote a tweet about it. Now, if LeBron James had said, come on, guys, that's tough coaching. That's how you win. That's how you get a championship. Take it from me. Well, that's not what LeBron James said. LeBron James said, if anyone did that to my kid,
Mm-hmm.
forget it. They'd have
Yep.
me to answer to. He
Yep.
was furious. And so were other professional athletes. So if you really want to believe that this is good for athletes at the college level and high school level, how come they don't do it in the professional leagues?
Mhm. Exactly. Exactly. That's a great point. So we've chatted a little bit here about the high school and college level. And one of the other things that you said that really resonated with me, was how there's this sense that when a child is getting bullied, the way they respond to it is by almost internalizing it, and then they say, I hate that person. Or, they'll tell you, when they come home from school that day, I don't like so and so. And this actually brought up a pretty an experience with us that has happened actually to our 9-year-old son. So obviously the step down from, we're talking to elementary level now. And he 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 is neurodivergent, but I don't know if this really, in this scenario, I don't think it plays that much of a factor. You can correct me if I'm wrong after I go through this, but he is one that we find does not tattletale ever. He is never one that is going to tell on somebody for something that they do or have done, or maybe they do to him or he saw that was wrong. He is not one to tell on anyone. But what he is, he's a very easy target for somebody to tell on him. So, that's just him. And so those kids that are trying to, get a laugh and enticing him to do something, or maybe pressuring him to do something funny, or, be class clown in some sort of way, or do something at the lunch table, then they're quick to tell on him. And so that brings him down even more, because it's like, wait, this kid did something wrong 5 minutes ago and I didn't tell on him. He's not getting in trouble. But the first thing that I did wrong, now he's telling on me, and now I'm getting disciplined by, XYZ teacher. So there's that aspect of like those kids that are getting bullied, not wanting to say anything. And then they'll come home, and my son will come home and he'll say, oh, I hate this kid, And so that really stuck. And then the additional piece of that, which ties into this whole area here that I'm talking about, is we have had an experience where it seems as if faculty, again, is not encouraging, but providing, I guess, more of an opportunity for our son to be bullied. And the reason being is because during lunch in their cafeteria, they also have a stage that, it's like they'll have a stage, and then they have their tables on, it's kind of like a basketball court with a stage type of a thing, where they have like, little school gatherings and plays and stuff. And when a kid acts out, what they do is they remove the kid from their lunch table and have that boy or girl sit on the stage by themselves and literally be the focal point of all of the under 100 to 200 kids that are sitting eating lunch, staring at this kid while they're literally having their lunch. And this has happened to our son a couple times. And I think to myself as a parent, A, I can't believe how that's making him feel. B, I can't believe that they're even doing that, knowing that he has an IEP in place, knowing that he is, he has his difficulties and his struggles. And then it's giving every kid in that cafeteria the opportunity to stare at him and then essentially make fun of him or bully him the next chance they get. So it's like, how are faculty even thinking situationally, hey, this would be a good idea for discipline in this scenario, whether the kid is neurodivergent or not? It just opens up the door to so many things. And I would be so curious to get your thoughts on just that entire approach, and why like there's such a disconnect sometimes with some of these faculty members, coaches, faculty members, whatever it may be.
Well, there's a whole series of very concerning neuroscience or brain science issues happening by what you're describing. It really helps all of us understand my approach, I think, by looking at this scenario from the lens of brain science. So instead of saying ethically, those are bad teachers, let us look at it instead from a medical point of view, not a moral point of view, a medical point of view. Now, from a moral point of view, I would say that the way those teachers are conducting themselves is extremely unfortunate. It is very destructive what they're doing. Now, I'd love to step back from that and say, and you know what? They're not bad people. So let's take a look at why they're doing this. Well, one of the key things to learn from brain science is we like to think that seeing is believing, but it's not true. The truth of the matter is, from a brain science point of view, believing is seeing. So if you've had your brain wired as a teacher to think, or let's say as a coach, to think that this type of discipline, public humiliation, ostracizing the kid, setting them up for a display, and also role modeling cruel behavior, which is, Derek, why you're saying you're setting this kid up for bullying by his peers. Well, of course you are, because bullying is a learned behavior. It's not natural to the brain to bully other people. That it has to be learned behavior. It's like racism is not natural to the brain. And actually, I'm going to say some more complex things about that in a moment. But let's just stay with this for now. Bullying is learned behavior. If you have teachers that bully students, you are going to see a huge rise in student population bullying one another. This is why kids that come from families where the parents bully the child and they think they're offering discipline and guidance, and really, being a tough coach kind of thing. Well, those parents are probably creating a bullying child, which is, not going to be great for that kid. So what those teachers are doing is really, really, unhealthy on so many different levels. I honestly can't believe it. But if they were wired to believe that this was really great conduct, then it's going to be hard to change their minds, only in the sense that, if you're raised in a family that thinks that girls are less able than boys. So if we want to use the proper term, a misogynistic family where girls are meant to serve men, they're meant to be in the shadows of men and stand behind them, whatever. You are wiring your kid's brain to believe that. Like you can wire your kid's brain to believe that LGBTQ are bad people, or that certain religions are, create anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. This happens through wiring. So if you want to look at a country like North Korea, which is a totalitarian dictatorship, they start wiring those kids at the age of 2. And they wire them at the age of 2 all through the school system, through math problems, through separating them from their parents, only get to see them on weekends, through stories. They wire them to hate the West. So they've got a population now of people who are indoctrinated that Western society, culture, and people are bad. So any of us can get wired this way. And one of the greatest challenges in our life is to tell our brain, hey, this is how you got sculpted, but you don't have to stay this way. The greatest thing about our brains is we are wired to repair and recover. Our brains can recover just like our bodies can, but we don't ever rehabilitate brains. It's like if somebody is highly dysfunctional and abusive, they should be going off campus, out of the gym for 6 months and getting reprogrammed. It can be done. It's like they're an alcoholic or they're drug addicted. They have to go and really do the hard work to reprogram the brain. And really what you'd have to be doing is instilling empathy. Now, I would say to those teachers is, when teachers in this school make a mistake, when they are somehow unable to control their emotion, or they make an inappropriate joke and only after the moment do they realize it was hurtful, or if they're incompetent in some way, is this how you punish them? Do you put them up in front of the faculty and all the students at the school and humiliate them publicly? No. Then why are you doing it to children? Children are supposed to be learning. You're supposed to be the role model and guide for them. You're not supposed to punish them. I just want to say one final thing on this, which is probably, I would hope it's going to upset your listeners. In 1976, 1977, there was a legal case in the US that's incredibly important. And there were, if we asked your audience right now, just said to everybody, take 1 second and close your eyes and think. If you saw 2 14-year-olds take a kindergartner and 2 of them beat this kindergartner while the third 14-year-old held him still so he couldn't get away and beat his legs black and blue so bad he had to go to the hospital. Would you call that bullying? Is that bullying behavior? So just take one moment, yes or no. Okay, I'm going to give you another scenario. There's 2 teachers and they beat a 14-year-old's legs black and blue with a paddle while the other teacher, the third teacher, holds the kid so he can't get away. That kid's so badly beaten on his legs, he has to go to the hospital. His parents launch a lawsuit. This is late 70s. They launch a lawsuit and the judge rules. And it goes to the Supreme Court. And the judge rules that you are not allowed in America to do that in a prison system. You can't have 2 guards beat a prisoner while the third guard holds him or her. That's against the law, but it's not for a teacher. So it is not cruel and unusual behavior for a teacher. It's legal. And in 19 states in America, 19, that is still legal today. 2026. So when we say, corporal punishment, if you saw someone being hit, no, there's 19 states in America that they truly believe, they're wired to believe that it is appropriate for an administrator or teacher to beat a child with what is called a bat.
That's awful. That is
awful. It's just a fact, though. This is what I mean about brain wiring. It's like we can believe anything. Now, you don't believe that that's healthy or going to teach you know what happens when you beat a child? Corporal punishment. You damage the prefrontal cortex in the brain. Now, that's invisible, so we tend to ignore invisible things, but the reality is you can see it on a brain scan. Just like you can see on a brain scan damage physically done to the brain by yelling, screaming, berating, ignoring,
Mm-hmm.
humiliating, shaming. It's
Yeah.
a fact. It's
Yeah.
a scientific fact.
I would be curious too, because again, what you're explaining they're obvious, right? They're that physical, obvious bodily harm, right? But I would be curious too, like, okay, for the parents that listen to this in their home, right? What are some things that maybe they're doing that are not as obvious, right? Maybe they're things that they're, verbally saying, right? That are affecting their children, whether they're athletes or not, but just like those things that are not so obvious that a parent would be able to kind of check themselves and say, "Oh yeah, crap, I do that. I should change how I do that." Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't think there's probably a parent listening, certainly not myself, who is always perfect with our children. There has been many a time that I've yelled at my kids, or I've I don't know, said something. I mean, I'm not much of a name calling person, but said something I regret. And it's far and few between. But when I lose my temper, I'm the kind of person that really loses my temper. Like I really yell, and I don't like the way I behave. And I would go to my kids afterwards and say, I acted like a jerk and I'm sorry. And what I
Mm-hmm.
said is not true. And I'm really, really sorry. I'm going to try harder, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, if you're doing that every day, it's probably really destructive. If you're doing it every once in a while because your kids scared you by doing something or whatever it is that kids do that make us all completely crazy, and it's usually scaring us, um, you're going to lose it. And it's because you're human. And to say to your kids, I'm human and I lost it, and that's not good. And I'm going to
Yeah.
try harder. And I really am sorry, really
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Um, that's not doing any kind of harm. That's showing your child that you're a human being. Now, if you are repeatedly um, believing that you were raised in a certain way and you're going to repeat that model because your parents did it or your coaches did it or your teachers, this is how you were taught, then you want to do a quick check on, have I been wired to believe this is healthy? And should I double check with present day science? I mean, back in the day when I was a kid, everybody smoked.
Mm-hmm.
My parents didn't smoke, but everybody else's did. Doctors smoked when they wrote your prescription. You smoke. Every nightclub I ever went to was so much smoke you could barely breathe. Everyone smoked in the workplace. We all thought it was normal. When I was growing up, they didn't think seatbelts were necessary. Like, these are huge, changes that have been based on science. Science taught us, wait a sec, or statistically, we can look at not wearing a seatbelt means you're much more likely to die or suffer a permanent injury in a car accident. All you have to do is put a seatbelt on, certainly a seatbelt on your kids, and you're going to be way better.
Yeah.
Same thing with smoking. You can't smoke at work or a nightclub or a restaurant or an airplane anymore. You just can't. Why? Because we know it's correlated with cancer. Well, guess what? Our new scientific revolution tells us that behaviors that we've normalized in our culture and society that we were raised with actually are harmful. So we need to make the change. And yes, it's hard work. It's like getting in shape when you've gotten out of shape. It's really
Yeah.
hard work, and it's
Yeah.
absolutely doable.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just myself as a father, I certainly approached fatherhood when my boys were real young, that hey, I'm going to go about this the same way that it was for me growing up, right? The same way that my parents were for me, and my wife would probably say the same. The way she was an athlete as well, but just as a mom in general. Um, and we quickly learned that that was not going to work. That was not going to work with our boys. We had to learn, adapt, and understand how to better parent them. And you know, but then I think back to why did I have this initial thought of how it was all going to go, or how I should be as a father? And then that takes me back to, okay, now I put myself back to when I was, a kid, a teenager, with my parents and how I was raised. And, I think, you know, there's this sense of when you are a when you're good at something, right? When you have a talent at something, whether it's sport or something, there's this fine line sometimes where the parents can kind of see that and push that a little too hard and then start to live vicariously through the kid. And I think then almost make that kid sacrifice things away from that activity or sport. And although that may not be in its own right, quote unquote, bullying, there's a lot of mental stuff that goes on there. There's a lot of manipulation. There's probably some, you know, parents trying to make you feel like, oh, you should be doing this. Don't go out, don't be doing this. You should be doing this because it's for your sport or it's for your activity or it's going to make you better and help you get to the next level. And when I really like kind of uncover it a little bit, I don't know if things like that were bullying for me, and again, I'm 40. I played the sport that I played at the highest level you can play it. And I think back to all of these things that I missed out or didn't do because I was so focused, but because of what I was being told to do on succeeding in my sport. And, my parents probably played a pretty big part in that. Now, they did amazing things as well, and I would never have gotten to where I've gotten had they not helped provide the opportunities to get there. But there's some steps along the way that I certainly wish were done differently. And I think affected me the older that I got, and then impacted how I was as a father initially to my son. But anyway, so I think about that. The other area that I think about is when I was playing, I think about teammates that I had. And there's this thing, I think, sometimes where, when you're the best player on the team, or, like your son was the best player on the team, right? Or, like I was on my college team or whatever, there's always that pocket of teammates that don't want to see you succeed as much as you're succeeding. And they're going to try to find your vulnerability, your insecurity, that thing that gets to you. And they're going to make sure they bring that up every day to bring you down. And that is something that I experienced significantly. And again, a successful athlete, like achieving all these things, but internally feeling like every day there was a group of people that didn't really want you to succeed, that were on your team versus, your competition. If they don't want you to succeed, that's one thing. That's just healthy competition. But when you have like your own teammates that want to try to bring you down, that really affects you. And have you worked with anybody or like seen that too, where it's like, hey, we're talking about the coaches a lot, right? We're talking about parents a lot, faculty members, but like when you got the team members that are also doing it, that's a whole other level as well.
Well, it's what we were talking about before, which is that the adults role model these behaviors and then they teach them to kids. So my first book on this was called Teaching Bullies. And I was writing about those, my faculty, my colleagues, because really what they're doing, they teach children bullying and then they say, don't do it. So it's like the teachers at your school, they're role modeling for an entire school. They're role modeling abusive behavior. And then somehow they discipline kids for mimicking, imitating, trying to access power from the same types of behavior. Like, how are kids supposed to understand what to do? So one of the things that happens in abuse cultures, like there's 4 key pillars, and people forget one of them. And it's the one of them that you are exactly talking about, would be my guess. Let me try this on you. So to create a bullying culture on a team or in a workplace or within a family requires you to have fear. You have to make people fear you by threatening them, putting them down, telling them you're a little disappointed you're doing this activity when it's not going to further you in your sport, which is about my ego, these kinds of things. So creating fear, creating and using humiliation, constant put down. So you've got this posse of kids on your own team that are kind of putting you down. They don't want to see you succeed and they make it clear. And they try to find vulnerabilities and they try to lower you, right? Then you've got retaliation. You dare to say no to your parents. I'm going to go out and do X, Y, and Z and have some fun for a change. Oh, you're going to pay a price for that. Same thing with whomever. So fear, humiliation, retaliation. Now, the one that gets forgotten is favoritism. So what happens in in a bullying or abuse dynamics. We can see this politically if we want to. It's very glaringly obvious in the geopolitical world right now how this gets used. You put people in positions of power who did not earn them. There's no meritocracy. It's not about succeeding or doing the best you can for your team or your school or your country. It's about you and your psychopathology. So as soon as you create that dynamic, the favorites are afraid they're going to lose their job. They're afraid they're not going to get the position. They're afraid they're going to get put on the bench. They're not going to get the lineup place that they want, right? So they're afraid. So they will do anything, including watching targets be threatened and humiliated. And they'll participate in it because the way you keep position is by licking the boots of the adults in your world who are all ego involved in what's happening if they're unhealthy. Now, as we know, the healthy coach, the healthy parent, and the healthy athlete, teammate is someone who has really healthy affective empathy. Empathy is the most important quality to train in anyone for their future, for their happiness in their family, for their personal success at work, and for themselves as an athlete, coach, teacher, whatever. Empathy is the name of the game, but we don't train it. Your teachers at your son's school should be training all the kids on, hey, somebody acts out. Kids, what should we do when someone's acting up? And I'll tell you right now, a bunch of those kids would say things like, hey, we need to give that kid some extra time because they're obviously trying to get attention. They feel left out. Or they'll say, that kid needs some downtime, like some meditation, mindfulness time. Maybe they need to have some extra time with a teacher or their best friend. Take 5 and just calm down their system. Like kids will come up with empathic answers. But if they constantly are exposed to adults who have power and prestige by putting kids down, bullying, ostracizing them, etc., they're going to learn that that's the way you get ahead.
Yeah. And I think too, I mean, just like, I remember, playing how sometimes when it would be like, hey, first of all, if you want to go speak to a sports psychologist or a therapist, right? Like if somebody would find that out that you were doing it, it was almost like, oh, there must be something going on with him or that athlete, or, like it was almost like looked down upon. Right. But to me, the most successful athletes and people are the ability that can open up and have those conversations to get the help that they need, not only when they need it, but proactively as well, to develop those routines that help them consistently stay the way in which they need to perform or do their jobs or whatever. And today, thankfully, I don't think it's looked down on, anymore or, as much. And so that's there's great strides there. The empathy part, it's so interesting to me because I 100% agree with what you said. But the thing that comes across, when we're watching these high level coaches is they're not trying to be empathetic. They're just trying to win. And, if they have to ruffle feathers just to win, that's what they do. Now, hopefully behind the scenes, there's some sort of empathy going on if they need to one-on-one with their players. I hope that's happening. The other trait that I think has always gotten to me personally is passive aggressiveness and sarcasm. Those two kind of, like coaches I played for had that. Players I played with were that. Those were the things that really played the mental mind games and just kind of built over time and knocked you down over time. Is that a form of, like, in your eyes, is that a form of bullying, or is that just a form of like just trying to be mean?
It's really interesting. Both of those techniques, so sarcasm and passive aggressive, those are such clear examples of people who don't sit well in their own power and they don't feel confident. So they have to get you in this kind of underhanded way. They also don't like to take accountability for who they are and what they say. They like to do the jab, but not be responsible. And that should be worrying. Someone can be sarcastic in a way that's funny and friendly and makes the person laugh. And we all know that. We can see that. But somebody can use any of these things to be abusive. And so, insinuation, passive aggressive. Somebody who's passive aggressive, like I think about women of a certain generation, and it was really because they didn't have any power. And because they didn't have power, they had to try and assert themselves in a kind of behind the scenes way. And not that I'm excusing it. It's a very aggravating way to treat someone. Absolutely. But sometimes if we're being empathic ourselves, we can look at that person and go, wow, that person lacks power. They can't just say it like it is because they don't trust themselves and they don't trust that they're going to be heard. And so in a sense, it's like for me, with the research that I have now, I look at people who are highly abusive and I feel really sorry for them. They really, we talk about the damage they do to other people's brains, but the bottom line is their brain is extremely dysfunctional. And if we looked at their brain on a brain scan, what we would see is they have eroded affective empathy. Like it doesn't light up. It doesn't activate. If we're looking at it on an fMRI scan, and we're showing this person images of an athlete crying or an athlete getting injured or an athlete losing the game and just being devastated, they don't activate with their affective and they don't feel the pain of that athlete. What activates in their brain is language and cognition. Well, those are great skills to have if you want to manipulate, abuse, tell a lie, gaslight. Those are the skills you need to create an aura of being a stable and sane person when actually you're highly dysfunctional.
So one of the traits that I feel is delayed to be developed in a neurodivergent person, and I've made mention to my son being that he has ADHD and high functioning level 1 autism. It seems as if there's two traits in him that he is still working on very much so. One is accountability. So taking, and the second would certainly be empathy. I guess as a parent, what can we do to help encourage that? And then scientifically, when do those kind of traits start to kick in a little bit more?
It's such a great question because this was a real struggle for me to figure this out and understand this. There's two types of empathy in the brain. So my guess is your son probably has advanced affective empathy, which is what comes with ADHD. It comes with autism spectrum disorder, if we even want to call it disorder. We talk about neurodiversity and it always makes me smile because the bottom line
Superpowers.
is, well, exactly. And every single brain on the planet, every single one is unique. We all have unique brains. We all have different brains. Our brains get wired in different ways. There is nothing that is homogeneous about human brains. Nothing. So we talk about neurodiversity as if it's this really like, whoa, this kind of distinct thing. But the reality is we're all neurodiverse. So one of the greatest qualities any of us can have, as we've already said, is the ability to try and understand what's going on in someone else's brain. If you want to really coach that person and help them fulfill their potential and help the team win and get the championship, you want to be absolutely highly attuned to all the different kinds of brains you've got playing a game together. That's the joy of sports, right? And it's always unpredictable. You never know who's going to win. Even into the last 3 seconds of the game, you don't know who's going to win. That's the joy of it. So if you're a really if you suffer, though, from some of like a challenge like autism, for example, where your brain struggles is in cognitive empathy. That's different. Your affective empathy is love. You feel people's pain. You want to help them. You just are compassion city. Even if maybe you're distracted in the moment and, you can be distracted. All of us can. But the bottom line is you feel. Now, your cognitive empathy is a challenge because when you have a systemizing brain, which is one of the defining features of autism. It's why you're a genius. It's why you can see systems in ways that the rest of us can't. You don't have the empathizing brain as much as the systemizing. Now, the empathizing brain in that case is the one that can read someone. So, for example, you and me can read each other. You pretty much have a sense of what I intend, what I think, and what I am feeling. Same for you. I can look at you and go, I know what you think. and what you feel and what you intend. Now, I'd have to check with you. I'd be like, Derek, is it true that? And you might be like, no, you're off there. I wasn't actually angry. I was thinking about blah, blah. Like we could
Sure.
do that where we do perspective taking with one another to check. But in general, that's built into us and it's a great advantage to have. Now, for your son, he might look at you and go, I have no idea what dad is feeling. I don't know what he intends and I don't know what he thinks. I know I love him. I love him. And if I saw him cry, I would feel his pain. But I kind of don't know. Like it's a bit of a blank for me. And that the energy that goes into systemizing takes energy away from being able to read other people's cognition. So I think, I mean, those kinds of things you can train. We can train brains to do anything. We can strengthen any kinds of neural networks in the brain. So knowing that your son might struggle with that, you could start to play games. Let's look at these different facial expressions, like get a big, book and say, what do you think that person might be showing by that expression? Now you're a teenager will look at it. All teenagers will look at a face where you and I would say, oh, that person's surprised. The teenager would say, I think that person's mad at me because they have hypersensitive brains and hyper threat detectors because their brains are changing from 10 to 25. The adolescent brain is rapidly changing. And so this is why they need adults to be really great guides for them. And this is the moment of athleticism in that, that time of brain change. It's when you're spending all your time with your coach. So if your coach understands adolescent brain development, is sensitized to it and knows how it works, it can be a really good prefrontal cortex and guide for their athletes. They're going to be just the greatest help in the world.
It's and what it's actually so our son, if he's ever called a bully, it really affects him emotionally to the point where he's brought to tears. So to the point you made earlier, they're teaching in school what it is. He knows what it is, and he doesn't want to be labeled that because he knows it's bad, right? And he can connect those dots, and it really makes him feel, no, like I'm not that, and it brings tears to his eyes. But at the same time, he's also very he wants that, like he misconstrues sometimes what leadership is. It's leadership and power, right? So it's like, we talk about these coaches that we were talking about earlier, right? They're in power positions and they feel that they can say and do whatever they want. And here we are, this 9-year-old where he's trying to understand and figure out what power is versus I'm being a leader. Ways in which he shows power now, it could be, he's pulling his brother, not letting go of his brother because he wants his brother to do something or play a game. And then, there's naturally like an argument or a fight that happens between the two of them because his brother wants to, go away and he won't let him go. Sometimes, saying the word stop, right? He has to understand what the word stop means. Being able to, in his mind, understand, hey, if somebody's saying stop, I need to actually do that. So he feels like, but if I don't stop, I'm in power. Right. So trying to like kind of work through all of that with him but again, if that bullying word comes out, he understands it and he's angry and sad. Don't call me that. I'm not that. But how do you walk that fine line where you're trying to teach that, hey, we can't be doing this because this is not right. Like how do you go about, like, just as a parent, right? Because you don't want to trigger too many things or like have too many things stick mentally that he may take with him the older he gets. So how do you go about that? If that makes sense, what I'm trying to ask.
Absolutely. You know what I would try? And I mean, who knows? Kids are so different. You don't know if it's going to work. But one thing I would try is I would just say to him, okay, hang on. So you've had this thing with your brother. Let's do a role reversal. You and me, let's act it out so that we can see how you feel. Now, if I hold you and I stop you from going and doing what you want to do, and I hold you and I say, I want you to do the taxes with me. So you're a 9-year-old. Or I want you to pay these bills. I want you to do the laundry with me. And he might be like, no, let me go. And then you say to him, okay, so when you have that feeling, one of the things that we always try to do, and it's hard work and it takes time, is when you want your brother to stay, try and imagine how he feels instead. Mm-hmm. So one of the great powers of leadership is not just thinking about what you want to do and what feels right for you and what's going to be good for you. The great leader is the one that goes, and now I go to my wise counsel and I say, wise counsel, here's what I want to do. And the wise counsel is like, you haven't thought about this, 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 and this. And you forgot that the impact on the environment or the landscape or the people will be this. Are you sure you want to do this? And then the leader's like, I never thought of that. And, this is, so think on the 9-year-old level, it's him and his brother, and he automatically has a power advantage because he's older and bigger.
Yeah.
Like I remember our older son, when his little brother was born, he turned to me and he said, so just to be clear, he goes, I'm 5, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, and Angus is 0, right? And I was like, yeah, yeah, he is, and it's funny how, but you can say to your son, okay, you're 9, I'm 40, I've got the power. How does it feel when I've got the power and I hold you back from what you want to do? Like, and just get him to try and project himself into the mind of someone else and train that strength.
And I'm trying to connect the dots here. And this then brings me back then to how and also he can be defined as strong-willed, right? And stubborn at times. So, and that could be there could be negatives to that, but there can also be positives to those as well. So now put him on the field. Now he's playing a flag football game, and he's coach who is in a position of power, an authority figure in that scenario, is telling him to do something, encouraging him to do something, putting him in a position that maybe is different for him or he hasn't played before. And one of the things that my son would come across as in that scenario would be uncoachable or not listening because he's set on his way. No, in my mind, I'm in power still. I'm 9 and I'm in power and I want to play safety. But my coach, who is 45 years old and has been coaching football for 10 years, is telling me to go play defensive line, and I don't want to do that. So there's that. And what in that scenario, my son literally may just shut down and say, no, I'm not doing it. And either walk off the field or just not do it. And then it'll be like, an emotional outburst probably. But like, there's that kind of that give and take there too. So like tying this all back to the athletic field, right? What like in that scenario, what can a coach actually do in that scenario if they are they come across a very strong-willed player who wants to be in a position of power because that's just how their brain works? They think they're leading, but they're being, but their coach is telling them differently or something they don't want to hear. How can you develop that coachability for somebody that's so young, understanding, there's only so much you're going to be able to do when they're this age, but when they get to the point or the place where your son's age is, how can you develop that along the way, or at least start developing it so when they're 16, 17, 18 years old, they have a much better feel for that?
Well, this is the enormous challenge of, it's one thing to parent and you're parenting 1 or 2 kids, 3 kids. When you're a teacher or coach, you've got 20 or 30. And it's hard. It's really, really hard to balance all the different brains in the room. That's one of your great challenges. I mean, if I was the coach of a child that was like that, I would want to say to them in a quiet moment, not in the heat of the moment. So before or at a practice, or I would want to say, hey, I want you to try something today. Do you think you could try it and see what it's like? And then the kid has a choice. So as soon as you give the kid agency and let them choose and get some feedback from them about what they really want to do and how they're feeling, you're already in an advantageous place, because then you're not getting put into the place where you're frustrated and you're going to be, your own emotions are going to come rushing to you're trying to organize all these kids. You're trying to play a game. You're trying to coach them all, trying to win, and you've got this kid going, no. Of course you're going to be it's normal to be instantly frustrated. So if you circumvent it by saying, okay, I know that this 9-year-old really doesn't like to be told in the midst of something to go off and do something different. They can't make that fast transition. Some kids can, and some kids just are followers, right? They just obey the rules and they do what they're told. And that's just how they're set up. It's not because they're good and a kid who's
Mhm.
defiant is bad. It's just a different brain wiring. So
Yeah.
as a coach, you always have to learn to work with the different wiring that you've got. So
Yeah.
that's what I would try. Not that it would succeed, but then you got to find different ways of relating to your diverse athletes. Like, I always talk to John O'Sullivan about this because I love John Wooden and I love how he was just the absolute paragon of empathy. So his way of succeeding was to meet each athlete where the athlete was, not try and impose something on the athlete.
Yep.
Like, I want you to do X. He just didn't approach things that way. And there's a really great book written by a psychologist, Alison Gopnik, and her book is called something like The Carpenter and the Gardener. And she's talking about parenting styles. And she says, if you're a parent who has created a structure in which your child must flourish, like a carpenter does, then you're making a terrible, terrible mistake. She says the job of parenting is to create the garden, create the oxygen and the soil and the rain and all of the nutrients and everything, and then let the child grow. The child will become who they were meant to be. Don't box them in. And it goes
Yeah.
back, Eric, to what you were saying before about, when parents try to make the child be something,
Exactly.
you
Mhm.
don't want to do that.
Yep. Yep. And and I'm going to be honest, it's not easy. Especially parents that have athletic backgrounds, that have their own egos and
Yep.
own expectations. It's not easy to change and adjust that way of thinking and that approach. Um, it's really cool when you're able to do it and then you see the results that are happening with your kids, because just to keep it very basic, they're just having fun doing what they're doing.
Well, and everybody has been talking about Norway because Norway cleaned up at the Olympics in a way that nobody's ever seen before. It was incredible. So everyone's talking about Norway. We certainly are in Canada. And what they learn when they take a look at the Norwegian way in which families and coaches do sports is the kids just have fun.
Yep.
Sports is nothing but child choice and fun until the kid at around 15, 16 says, and this is what our son did. Our son played every sport. He couldn't get enough of
Yep.
sports. But at 15, 16, he said, you know what? Basketball is my sport. I am going to pour heart and soul into it because that's all I want to do. That's my game.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
and kids will make that decision when it's the right moment. But this is, when you hear that whole, model of, in North America, so in USA and Canada, we drive our kids, 70% of them out of sports at 13. We drive them out. All these
Yeah.
people that could be athletes for life, we ruin sports for them as adults. And it's just a fact. We have to take a
Yep.
hard look in the mirror and go, yeah, we're so wedded to our system, but it's really not working. And we say, oh, we're doing it because we want them to win. Well, it doesn't get wins. Not
Yeah.
like Norway does. So let's try and do something different.
For sure. Couldn't agree more. Well, let me ask this. So, as we wrap up here, if you could, are there any, kind of final thoughts, key takeaways that you would have for the parents and the coaches that are listening to this that, they could, really think about and put to use when they kind of approach not only sports, right, but just daily, daily life in general that can create that environment that is much more, much more conducive, much more positive, much more full of empathy, towards their athletes and their students.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is to remember it is a process, and especially for all the athletes and sports and athlete parents out there, it's a lot like sports. If you just remember that your brain is like a muscle, it has to be exercised. In fact, we know that the more we exercise our brains leading into old age, the more we do not get dementia. That's because brains atrophy just like bodies do when we don't exercise them. So the more that we set our sights on learning new things, trying new things, adapting, doing things differently is the healthiest thing in the world for our brains. And you're not going to be perfect. Just like when you're getting in shape and you're working out, you're clumsy and awkward and it doesn't feel good and you feel resistant. It's okay. The brain does the same thing. It's just like, yeah, let's watch Netflix and forget about this new coaching idea. We're all like that. But you can absolutely strengthen anything you want to strengthen in your brain. It's wired to repair and recover and get stronger. So there's a million different, I write about it obviously in my books, and I also write for Psychology Today, and I write very specific. This is what you can do. This is what the research says. And there's so many things we can do. It's pretty exciting, actually.
Oh, it's so exciting. No, I just want to thank you for all the work you're doing. And it's amazing to learn, and I'm sure there's so many people that can benefit from all of your, not only your books, but the work you're doing. I know you have a TED Talk out there. There's other podcasts you've been on as well that people will be able to, to hear you. And I just want to thank you because it helps parents like me better understand what we can do to help our kids ultimately just be happy, So thank you so much for joining, Jennifer. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks a lot. It was a great conversation, Derek. I really appreciate it. And I hope that this is useful for the audience, and yeah, happy to chat with anybody anytime.